Now you should be able to. Sorry about that. Okay, so just to repeat what I've been saying to myself, this is going to be another Bootstrap 4 Magic Hours, and if you attended the last one, you may remember that we moved at a really good clip, but most of the class was not able to actually keep up. I think everyone left with a nice new project, and that was great. But thanks. But they weren't able to keep up with me, and I don't think it was quite the informative Bootstrap session that I was hoping for. So this time around, we're going for something a little bit more contained, straightforward, clean. As I said, this is going to be what we're recreating. It would serve as the homepage of a blog, maybe a writer's portfolio, some kind of content funnel. These would all act as clickable articles or other bits of content. Load more entries down here. The most recent would be displayed pretty prominently like this. And it's a nice and clean 50-50 dissection, or almost 50-50 dissection of the window. So you're going to want to find, we're only using one image for this project, so you probably want to take a moment to find an image if you intend to follow along with me in real time. We're going to be making this sidebar, and if this feels overly simple to you, you're wrong. That's all I'm going to say. There's more to it than meets the eye, and more than that, it's very straightforward, it's very clean, and a lot of what you're going to need to deal with once you get out there as front-end developers is websites or platforms that are specifically designed for the dissemination of content like this. If that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry too much about it. It's kind of part of a longer conversation. But go ahead and pick one image. You can go to a site like pexels.com, unsplash.com, and just find one generic image of whatever you'd like that we can plug into this right part of the page for now. And then we're going to code this out using Bootstrap, as much Bootstrap as possible. And when we're done, if we have time, we're going to make an animated menu and a couple of other little touches. We'll see how far we get. All right, so this is the preview. This is where we want to end up. So I'm going to go ahead and start coding in a fresh page now. Okay, so as you can see, I'm starting with nothing. Just to be sure, we should all have Bootstrap linked to whatever project folder we're working in. That means both Bootstrap's CSS style sheet and the 3 Bootstrap JavaScript dependencies. So that's going to be jQuery or jQuery Slim, Popper, and bootstrap.js. If you're unsure of where to find these, you're going to go to getbootstrap.com, click on Get Started, and right under Quick Start, you'll find the CDNs already filled out. There's a link tag. There's 3 script tags, all ready for you to just copy and paste. Okay. We'll also be using Font Awesome, so it would be a good idea to include Font Awesome in your project folder. Now I'm going to title this Bootstrap Magic Hour. And we'll get started. Now, when using Bootstrap, there is virtually always a very foundational class that we apply to an element. You can apply this class name to your body. However, you'll most commonly see it applied to an element just inside the body that encompasses all of the rest of your page's content. And that's going to be a container or container fluid. Well, jumping back to the original example, it does look like our content stretches all the way to the sides of the window, so I'm going to use a container fluid rather than container. If you're not sure about the difference between container and container fluid, that's the difference. Container fluid is 100% of the width of its containing element. In this case, it's the body or the window. And a container gives you an automatic margin to the left and right until you get to a small enough screen. Alright, so just inside my body element, I'm going to create a div, the class of container fluid. I'm going to make my font a little bigger. Sorry about that. Container fluid, okay, and this is going to be the master container, essentially. All of my content is going to be inside this container fluid. That's just going to ensure that inside of this div, I can use Bootstrap rows, columns, everything that I need to, and it will function, because this container or container fluid is required for Bootstrap classes. All right, moving on. Next thing we want to do is we want to set ourselves up with this evenly divided page here. So this is going to be two Bootstrap columns sitting next to each other. And in order to make use of Bootstrap columns, those columns need to be contained inside a row. Okay, columns inside of a row, and a row needs to be in a container or container fluid. We have our container fluid. So inside of this container fluid, I'm going to create another div, give it a class of row. Close it. And inside of this row, I'm going to create two Bootstrap columns. Div class equals call-6. One after the other. Okay, remember, a Bootstrap row can contain a maximum of 12 columns on one line. 12 columns on one line. So if I want each of these divs to occupy exactly half of this row, which will span the full length of our container fluid, they need to each be 6 columns. I'm not going to worry about making them responsive just yet. We'll do that later. Okay, so we have two 6-column divs evenly dividing our row inside our container fluid. They still have no content, so let's start putting in some content. In that first 6-column div, I'm going to start putting in some of this text content here. So I'll start with paragraph. Okay, this purple ampersand BULL semicolon is just the ASCII code, or I'm sorry, the HTML code for this little bullet point here. Okay, so that's what that is, if you're wondering. Okay, so that's going to be the metadata for this first article, and then in an H1, 5 myths and then in a paragraph below that, copy all of this. Let's see where we are. Okay, good start. Very first thing I might want to deal with is, let me make this bigger. This metadata up top, in the original, it's completely capitalized, but in mine it is not. Now I could, of course, go back here and actually capitalize my text in here, but we're trying to use as much Bootstrap as possible. So I'm going to give this paragraph a class of text hyphen uppercase, and that capitalizes all of that metadata. In addition, I want that creative to be bold and blue or teal, just like this one in the original. So I'm going to come into my paragraph element. I'm going to wrap this creative, this word, in a span, and I'm going to give that span a class of text hyphen info. And what that's going to do is going to give it this blue teal color. That's a Bootstrap class. Just like when you, if you've used Bootstrap before, you've probably seen button primary, btn space btn hyphen primary, and you've probably used that on your buttons before, and that makes them a very strong blue color. That's because primary is kind of a key word, a key class word for Bootstrap. It makes everything you apply it to blue, including text. If I did text primary, we would see creative. It's hard to differentiate probably through the YouTube stream, but it is a more blue. But I'm going back to text info because that's the color we're using. Info is yet another one of these colors. There's also warning, danger, success. These are all color-bound keywords to use in Bootstrap classes. If you are interested in them, go to getbootstrap.com and read the documentation. Alright, and I'm also going to give that paragraph a class of font-weight-bold. And it is bold. Okay, so that takes care of actually a decent amount of styling, these three classes between text uppercase, text info, and font weight bold. I've taken care of a fair amount of styling without having to write any CSS at all, and I don't have to worry about, is it going to affect this paragraph? I don't have to worry about being specific. I don't have to give this paragraph an ID so that this paragraph is not also entirely uppercase. I don't need to give this span an ID just in case I need to use another span further on in my page. I can simply take care of that inside of these HTML tags by using Bootstrap. Okay. All right, let's keep going. I zoomed in so my page has changed layout. Let's get this picture in here too. So for this one, I may need to give this second div some kind of identifier. I'm going to give it a class of, well, no, I'll give it an ID of hero image, hero-img. And this I do need to use CSS for. I'm going to jump into my CSS, select my element with the ID of hero image, and give it a background image of this image file contained in my images folder. Now, I hope all of you remember that if you're applying a background image and attaching a background image in your CSS, the image file path is going to be slightly different than you would write in an image element in your HTML. That's because we're coming from our main.css file in this case and not our index.html. So the very first thing we need to do in that file path is .. which takes us up one directory. That puts us in the root directory of our project. So now we're sitting next to index.html, next to our images folder, our CSS folder, our JS folder if you have one. So .. and the next stop on this path is going to be the images folder / and inside of that we're looking for path.jpeg. Okay, so that will apply the background image. Let's check our page. Okay, it's there. Obviously it's not tall enough, but that's neither here nor there. Before we move on, there's something else I want to deal with. This last sentence of our paragraph, it should be 2 lines down. It should be 2 lines down, but it's currently not. So let's go ahead and fix that. Now, when you want to style a paragraph element this way in HTML, normally you cannot simply hit the enter key a couple of times and expect the browser to correctly interpret that. The browser is liable to automatically eliminate all that empty space. So the better way to go about it is by inserting this line break element. Okay, it has no closing tag. I just added 2 of them. Don't get confused about that. I added 2 line breaks. I'll start with 1 to show you what that's going to look like. Okay, so that brings that last sentence down to the next line, but I want it to go one further, and there we go. That's where we want it. And we also want to force this row which contains column 1 and column 2, to be the full height of our web page, at the very least. So what I'm going to do is in CSS, I'm going to select my div with the class of row, or my element with the class of row, and I'm going to give it a minimum height of 100 VH. Actually, let's do this another way. Rather than applying this to my row, I'm going to apply this to my HTML element and my body element. Okay? If you're not sure, the HTML element is the element which contains your entire document. We don't usually think about it very much, and we almost never apply styles to it. And the body you should be familiar with. Okay, so I've given my body and my HTML a height of 100 VH. VH is viewport height, so 100 VH is going to be 100% of our window. And if I reload, that's not going to change anything. But, again, we're trying to use Bootstrap as much as possible. I can come in here and apply a class of H-100 to the container fluid, and that's going to force this element to be 100% the height of its parent, which is the body. Okay, so this container fluid will be as tall as we want it to be. Now we need this row to be as tall as we want it to be, and then we're going to want both of these column divs to be as tall as we want them to be. Okay, so let's see what happened there. I'm going to change this min height to height. That should fix that problem. There we go. Okay, so the way H100, or if you're interested in vanilla CSS, the way this height 100% works is it takes the height property of its parent and applies that to the element which has height 100%. I gave the body in HTML a minimum height of 100 VH, which is not the same as height and does not work for does not inherit correctly when you use height 100%. Okay, so I give the body in HTML a height, not min height, a height of 100 VH, and then their child container, this container fluid, has the H100 Bootstrap class, which forces it to be as tall as its parent, and every element inside of that container fluid and inside of this row has the same class, forcing everything to be 100 VH in height. Okay, so that just makes sure that we don't have that big old block of white space down here. Okay, next thing, our background image is repeating, which we don't want. So that's going to be CSS. Underneath background image, I'm going to write a property called background repeat, no repeat. Okay, that's good, but now it's too small. So I'm going to change background size to a value of cover. And what this is going to do is force the background image to be at least as big. Well, it's going to force the background image to be as big as necessary in order to fully cover the content of this element. Okay, so now it will force that image to be as tall as it needs to be, or as wide as it needs to be, to completely cover that element, this column. Okay, but it's not quite aligned right, not the way I want. So I'm going to add another property called background position, and I'm just going to give it a value of center. Background position will take percentages, but center is also a very recognizable value for it. All right, so we're getting there. Next, we want all of these article names or article links down here. So in my index.html, inside that first column, I'm going to take all of the content I've put in there so far, and I'm going to actually put them in their own, let's put it in a section, just so we don't have so many divs. Okay, so now all of this is in a section. And below that section, I'm going to create another section, and this is going to contain these 4 articles. So inside the section, all we need to do is, I think these are H3s. Let's try it. So there's the title, and then we want this meta information down here too, so I'm actually going to copy it from up here, this whole paragraph containing the span and the date, paste, and just change the text. And let's see. Okay, looks good. It's probably an H2. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's one, and I can copy all of this. Three times, so we have 4 of them. I don't, in general though, I do not like, and you should get out of the habit of having loosely floating blocks of text like this. Because right now, all we really have is H2P, 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 H2P. Each H2 and each P should be grouped together. That's how this content works. We have this grouped with this, and this grouped with this. So this kind of makes me nervous, and it should you as well. You should get out of the habit of just kind of writing text, one line of text after the other, if that text is supposed to be grouped in some way. I don't ever want a layout error to occur, or a media query or something to cause the wrong paragraph to associate with the wrong H2 or something similar. So instead, I'm just going to plop all of these in list items in an unordered list. One, 2, 3, and 4. Alright, so now we have 4 list items, each containing 1 article. Just like that. All inside an unordered list inside this second section. So I'm just going to copy and paste the text so we can move this along. don't forget, we're still taking advantage of quite a few Bootstrap classes and styling each of these paragraphs of metadata and each of these spans with these capitalized, these all uppercase categories for these articles. Okay, good. So far, so good. But one thing you'll notice is our unordered list is styled considerably more than we'd like. We've got those bullet points on their list items that we don't want, and most unordered lists, all unordered list elements actually, have a padding to the left inherently. So we want to get rid of that, and I'm going to try to do that with entirely Bootstrap. Inside my unordered list element, I'm going to give it a class of list hyphen unstyled. There we go, done. Didn't need to deal separately with padding or list style type or anything like that. List unstyled as a class name applied to unordered lists, and both of those stylings are taken care of immediately. No CSS written. Okay. Moving on. Let's start spacing out this text more the way that we want. There's not a whole lot of negative space right now, but there is quite a bit here. There's quite a bit of padding to the left and right and the top. There's space in between these two sections, and then we'll deal with this load more entries bit here. So if I want to space all of this out, let's start with pushing them away from the sides of the column element that contains them all. I'm going to find that div here, div column 6, height 100, and I'm going to give it an additional Bootstrap class, put it in the middle here, called P-5. Okay, and what this does, P-5, is it applies an automatic padding of 5M, I believe it is. Let's pull it up the inspector and check. Of 5M all around all four sides of this element. 3 REM, that makes sense. That doesn't look like 5. Okay, it applies an automatic padding of 3 REM all around the sides of this element. You can use this for margin as well, M-5. These are super useful and quick ways of spacing out a lot of your content using Bootstrap classes. If you're thinking about that number, it goes from 0 to 5. It does not go any higher than 5. There's no P-6. See, that does not work. However, let's change the class here down to 4. Padding of 1.5 REM. And then down to 3, 1 REM. 2, 0.5 REM, 1 quarter REM, and finally 0. P-0 will force an element to have 0 padding along all four sides. Okay? What if you only want padding to the top or the bottom or the left or the right? Well, I can write PT-5. That's padding top -5, or padding right. It's padding right -5. Or I can do padding X, which is going to be left and right. The X-axis, left and right, has a padding of 5. Or PY, top and bottom, the Y-axis. Okay, but I'm going to bring it back to padding 5. We want it on all four sides. And that looks good, but it's still not quite enough. It looks like there's more space in the original, right? On the sides and especially on the top here. Well, we can't add any more padding using a Bootstrap class. That's as much as Bootstrap will let us do. P-5 with padding of 3 REM. So you might think now's the time to jump into CSS and manually insert more padding on this column element. Well, you could, but I wouldn't recommend it. Instead, I'm going to come down to the section element, which contains this top article here, and I'm going to give that section a class of, let's try padding X 4 and padding Y 5. Okay, so that's going to be padding of 4, or what was that, 2.5 rem? 1.5 rem to the left and right, and a padding Y 5, so that's going to be 3 rem of padding to the top and bottom. There you go. Alright, that's looking a little better. It's looking more like what we want. Actually, we could probably add even more padding to the left and right. So let me just change both of these classes to padding 5. There we go. Okay. Oh, looks like I lost the original for a second. There it is. Okay. Yeah, I think we needed that extra padding. Okay, so far so good. I probably also want some padding down here though, don't I? Wait, because our articles are not lining up with this top article here. And we don't see all the negative space that we're seeing down here. Okay, so this section probably wants some padding too. Let me just copy this class, apply it to the next section. Okay, pretty good. Happy with that. Okay, the last thing we need is to load more entries down at the bottom. So, down below my section containing all my articles, I'm going to add another section. And in this, I'll put in, let's try an H4. It says load more entries. Okay. Well, this one is capitalized, and it is not bold. This one is bold. So that's something we want to deal with. So where I have that H4, I'm going to give the H4 a class of text uppercase again, to make it all uppercase, and a class of font weight normal. Okay, good. It's also not lining up with the two sections above it. So let's try giving it that same padding class. That works. Looks a little low, so maybe I'll change this to just PX5. So we get rid of the top and bottom padding. Now it looks a little high. Let's try padding top 3. Let's try 4. Okay, that looks good. So you might want to fiddle with padding or margin classes in Bootstrap. You might need to get where you need to be, but again, this is how much CSS I've written to get here. A page that is already styled well enough and ready to go. So the next step we should start thinking about is making it responsive. Bootstrap makes creating responsive websites extremely easy, as you should know. But currently, it looks a little weird when it gets too big, and when it gets too small, it just looks ridiculous. So on a mobile phone, this site would be very, very unwieldy. We don't want that. So we're going to come back to our HTML, and this is mostly going to involve the classes on our column divs, like this one. Remember, the way Bootstrap's grid system works is it recognizes a number of different breakpoints in screen sizes. There are extra small screens, medium screens, large screens, and extra large screens. Using Bootstrap classes, we can dictate exactly how many columns of a row we want an element to occupy at any different screen size. So currently, with my having written col-6, column 6, this div will take up 6 columns or 50% of the row under all circumstances. There is no other class to tell it otherwise. But I could change this. I want each of these columns to be full size, the full width at a mobile screen size. So when you're at a screen like this, I want the text to be on top and the image to be on the bottom, just like that. It makes sense? So how many columns of the row does this div need to take up in order to be 100% the width of the row? Well, it's going to need to be 12. So I'm going to change that 6 to column 12. But I don't want it to stay column 12. In fact, let's do that to both of these and reload, see where we are. Okay, so now the text is taking up the full width of the row, and so is the image. Okay, but we don't want this at all screen sizes. Eventually, maybe when we get here, this feels like a medium screen size, we want each of these 12 column divs to revert back to being 6 column divs. 6 column divs that sit right next to each other and occupy 50% of their allotted space. So after that column dash 12, I'm going to write column dash, and then I'm going to write the screen size that I want, medium, and then the number of columns, 6. Okay, so once we hit a medium screen size, this column 12 class is going to be overridden, and this div is going to occupy 6 columns. So let's save. Bring this in. Okay, 12 columns, 12 columns, 12 columns. Actually, I didn't do this to the image either. I mean to the image as well. Okay, 12 columns, 6 columns. 12, 6, 12, 6. 12 and 12, and then 6 and 6. Now, it still looks like it's happening a little soon, so maybe I want to push that up to a large screen size. Column large 6 for both of these. Okay, so 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, and 6. 12, 6. And that's pretty good. This would be a tablet in portrait mode, a large tablet in portrait mode. So I can live with that. So far, so good. Now, I don't like how our image is getting cut off here. And the reason for that is actually kind of complicated. We have enough text here in this column on the left that it is overflowing this div, which is fine. We can still see the text. There's no problem there. But this div and the div next to it and the row that contains them and the container that contains the row that contains them are all 100% of the height of the body and HTML elements, which, remember, we set to 100 VH. Well, currently, with my window loaded, 100 VH is exactly as tall as we see. The problem is we can scroll down, and that tends to break a little bit of what's happening here. So there are a couple ways we can deal with that. One thing we can try in CSS is we can come to this background image and try giving it a property of background attachment fixed. Let's see if that does anything. Okay, that causes the background image to parallax, which is nice, but it's still not doing what we want down here, so I'm going to get rid of that. Somehow we need to deal with the height of these two elements. So let me see, where is the breakpoint where we go from 6 column layout to 12 column layout? It looks like happens at about 793 pixels. Okay, so I'm going to figure out how tall is my window right now. At 793 pixels wide, it is 929 pixels tall. And that's just tall enough to contain all of our text. So I'm going to change this 100 VH to a height of, let's just say 945. Let's push it up a little. I'm going to give them a height of 945 pixels. Oh, that's interesting. Obviously, that is not tall enough. Okay, so let's just eyeball this. Let's try 1300. Almost. Let's try 1320. A little bit more. 1340. Alright, there we go. I can live with that. That's pretty good. Now, all of these elements are 1,340 pixels tall, which is perfect because that just allows us to contain all of our text at the smallest possible layout that they'll need before they switch to 12 columns each. And our image is flush from the top to the bottom. Everything looks good. But there are a couple problems here. This height is static. It's completely static. So as I pull my window out, it's going to stay 1,340 pixels tall, even if it really doesn't need all that height. Now it feels okay when you go to the large side, but as you go smaller, it's still not too bad, but our image is really, really tall, much taller than it needs to be, right? So what we really want is to change the height of this second div when we hit this breakpoint. Okay, the reason this is happening is, again, this height 100% on this hero image div. And that height is still going to be 100% of its parent container, which is now set to 1,340 pixels, even when they're stacked vertically. It's taller than it needs to be. Now, if you're okay with that, it's not something you need to worry about. But if you wanted to make this smaller at a smaller screen size like this, which would not be inappropriate, you would need to probably use a media query or make a custom class like starting from H50, and then at a large screen size, you want to switch it to H large 100. Unfortunately, Bootstrap does not support that, but this is the logic that you would want. Same logic that you get from using the grid system to plan out your columns for your different height layouts. And it would be easy enough to create your own classes to support that. I'm going to leave it for now. You can also just write a vanilla regular old media query to deal with that if you have to. The only thing that you need to be aware of is whenever you use Bootstrap classes all use this exclamation mark important value in their CSS style sheets. And that exclamation mark important is much harder to override than regular IDs or classes or element selectors. The only way you can override an exclamation mark important is with another exclamation mark important. And the more of these you use, the dirtier your code gets. So you want to be careful of stuff like that. Alright, we're pretty well set up now with the main content of our site, so I'm going to move on to this side menu bar here. Back into my index. You can choose to do this on top of your row, above your row, or below your row. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to do it on top just because that's where I'm used to writing menus or nav bars. So above my row, I'm going to write a div. I'm going to create a div. And inside this div, I'm going to create a UL. And inside that UL, I'm going to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 list items. Six list items. Now let's give them some classes. This div, I'm going to give it a class of background dark, bg-dark. That's a Bootstrap class that will automatically apply this background color here, this dark gray, slatish background color. So that's nice and quick. I'm also going to apply text-white because I know that I want all my text in here to be white colored, all my icons to be white. That works. Save. I also want this div to also be as tall as the container fluid. Okay, so I'm also going to give it the class of H100. So far, so good. This is what we have. And a lot of this is because this div is a block element, so it's extending the full width of the screen and all of that. So it's forcing all of the content of our actual site down below it. Well, we want our menu to be fixed anyway, which is going to take care of that. So I'm going to come into CSS. Let me give this div an ID. Give it the ID of menu. Jump into CSS. Select my menu. Give it the property of position fixed. Okay, well, now it's where it should be, and it's not pushing our content down, so that's good. But first, there's some weird padding or margin pushing it away from the left side here. So I'm going to open my inspector and take a look at that, see where that's coming from. To do that, I'm going to need to select my menu div, see what's going on. Well, if I hover over the container fluid, you can see that it has a little bit of padding to the left and right. And you can see that down here in your Styles tab if you examine it. So if I turn off this padding right and padding left, well, that gets rid of that problem. So I'm going to I could do that in CSS, but I'm going to take advantage of another Bootstrap class. In the container fluid, my div with the class of container fluid, I'm going to also give it a class of padding-0. And that takes care of the padding. Okay, so far so good. Let's get some of our icons in these list items. Now these are all font awesome icons, so should be able to just write icon class equals FA. Let's see. Okay, that's right. So I'm going to copy this and insert all of my icons. Looks like we have bars, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Behance. Alright, all of our icons are in there, but we have the same problem as our last unordered list in that we have those bullet points and we don't want them. Here, I'll zoom in so we can see what we're dealing with. We don't want those bullet points, so once again I'm going to give my UL a class of list unstyled. Good. Now our menu's feeling really, really thin. So a couple things we could do here. We could give it padding and see if that fattens it out. But I want to very precisely control how wide it is. So I'm going to actually choose to do this part in CSS. I'm going to come into CSS, and where I've selected my menu, I'm going to give it a width of about 8 VW. Okay, 8 VW is going to be 8% of our viewport width. So it's always going to be 8% of the width of the window. There may be a point where that gets a little too small, right? So what am I going to do about that? Well, in addition to width of 8 VW, I can also give it a min width of, say, 80 pixels. What does that look like? It's probably too big, but what that's going to do is it will be 8% of the width of the viewport until it hits 80 pixels, and then it's going to hold. It's actually a little big, so I'm going to push this down to 50. So it'll get bigger or smaller as long as it can until it hits 50 pixels, and then it's going to stop changing size. Excuse me. So that works for me. Now we want to get all of these icons centered. Well, I can take my list and give it another class of text-center. That works. And we also want them to space out a bit, right? So one easy way to do this would be to give each icon a padding Y class of, let's try 4. Something like that. There are a lot of different ways to handle this particular part, but this is probably the easiest, most straightforward, and most immediate. So I'm going to go with it. Just like that. Now, if you're using a method like this, though, you want to make sure that you can still see, because this is a fixed menu, you want to make sure that you can still see all of your icons, even on the smallest mobile phone. And I'm going to say that you can. That looks good. So you can still click on any of these icons. Okay. Now, let's format that bus. We want that teal background, and it needs to be a little bit bigger, right? If we're pretending that this is our logo or whatever it is that's representing our business or this site. So I'm going to find this list item, which contains my bus. I'm going to give it a class of bg-info. Remember text info to make this text that teal colored? Well, bg-info will make the background that color. It's exactly what we want. And now let's make that bus a little bigger. I'll need CSS for this one. Select my icon with the class of font awesome bus. Give it a font size of, let's try 2 rem. Yep, looks about right. Okay. So far, so good. What I don't like is how our menu is threatening to overlap our text content. And that's because it is position fixed. So it is sitting right on top. Actually, right now it's behind, but it's sitting right on top of all of this content. We don't want that. We want it to basically sit side by side with the rest of our page's content here. So I'm going to use a little bit of custom CSS to select my row. And it normally has a width of 100% or 100 VW, but I'm going to force it to have a width of, what's 100 minus 8 VW, the width of our menu, of 92 VW. Okay, so that helps. And the other thing I'm going to need to do is force it to align to the right side. I do not want to use float. I do not want to use text align or anything like that. I can simply find my row and give it another class of ML auto. There we go. Now our row is flush against the right side of our page. So all of this space underneath our menu is completely empty, and they're never going to overlap. Well, maybe if we get really, nope, never going to overlap. Perfect. Okay. ML Auto. Let's talk about that for a second. ML Auto is a class, a Bootstrap class, which stands for margin left auto. Margin left auto. What that does is it forces an element to push as hard as it can against its left side. And that will force that element to move to the right until it encounters resistance. So I'm going to apply that to this visual design article here and watch what happens to it. I'm going to give this list item the class of ML Auto. Hold on a second. Right now, I'm not going to give it the list item. I'm going to give it to the H. What am I going to give it to? All of these text elements are block, so they're already huge. Right, let me create a new element down here just so we can test this out. It's going to be a span. Okay, so this is our span. Spans are inline elements, not block. So if I give this span the property of margin 0 auto, in addition to display inline block. Okay, nope, that's not going to work. What do I want to do here? I know. Let me create a div. The class of column 4. And it's going to contain that same text. All right. Perfect. So this is now a 4-column div sitting between our articles like this, which contains some text. Now, if I give this div the class of ML Auto, it's going to jump to the right side of the page. It's going to push all of that margin as hard as it can to its left. If I change that to MR Auto, margin right, well, then it's back where it started. But we also have MX Auto, which will cause it to center perfectly. MX Auto is the same as margin left auto and margin right auto, or in other words, margin 0 auto. Okay, MX Auto is an excellent way to center block or inline block content. And I can pair that with text hyphen center to center not only the element itself, but the text inside that element. Okay, so margin left auto, margin right auto, margin X auto. These are really useful Bootstrap classes for quick layout options. All right, what's next? So far, so good. Let's get some of these hover effects going on our icons. I'm going to use my inspector to get this started. Select my LI, and I'm going to try giving it a background color of light gray. That's way too light, so I'm going to click on this little color box in my Styles tab, drag it down until I get to a background color I like, copy it, copy the hex code for it, and in CSS, I'm going to select, right, when I hover over Font Awesome Icons, No, that's not right. We're going to do this. Select our menu, our UL, our LI. Okay, so when we hover over list items in our menu, we want the icons inside to have, no, not the icons, just the list items. Confusing myself. We want the list items to have this new background color. There we go. Okay. But we also want the icons to get a tiny bit bigger. So for that, same selector, but we need to go one step further. When we hover over the list items in our menu, we want the icons to grow to a font size of, let's say, 1.5 rem. There we go. So now the icons get bigger and the background color changes. Couple problems. One is they kind of clip in and out. It's very instantaneous, and it's not, you know, it's cool, it does the job, but it's not as smooth and appealing as the original. So to do that, we need, of course, a transition property. Something I like to do a lot of the time is simply use the asterisk selector in CSS and apply a transition property to everything, because I use it a lot. Okay, so this is a transition property, 0.3s for 0.3 seconds, and ease. Okay, this means that any kind of hover effect, any kind of state change will take 0.3 seconds to complete. So rather than happen instantaneously, we see the background color change and the icons grow bigger over the course of 1/3 of a second. So it's not a lot of time, but it's just enough that we can see it and we see them seem to organically move from one state to the next, and it gives it quite a bit more appeal. Okay, problem number 2 is our bus is also changing size, and we don't want that. We want all of the other icons to respond like this, but not our bus. So, down to where we're telling our icons to change font size, I'm going to add on to this icons with the class of Font Awesome. I'm going to add a pseudo selector. So, I.fa : not parentheses dot fa hyphen bus. Okay, so this is going to select all icons with the class of fa, which are not elements with the class of fa hyphen bus. In other words, it will apply the effect to all Font Awesome icons, just not the bus. Alright, what's next? Our icons feel a little small. You can make them bigger if you'd like. I'm not going to deal with that right now. Let's differentiate this first article a little bit. It's bigger, which is great and all, but there are some good typographical classes in Bootstrap that you should take advantage of. One of them that I use for major titles or headings is, it might actually be too big for this particular scenario. Here's that H1. I'm going to give it a class of display followed by a number 1 through 4. I'm going to try 3. Display 3. Way too big. Holy crap. Display 4. That's a little better. And display 4 or display 1 through 4, apply some really nice stylings to text automatically. Gives them a line height of 1.2, which spaces them out a little bit, makes them feel cleaner, a lighter font weight of 300, and it makes them bigger, which is neither here nor there. But it's really nice for major headings, and it's really it's an easy solution. That kind of moves away from making everything in H1 and everything super bold and heavy and all of that. Okay, so I like that. I'm going to stick with it. Gets a little big right here, but it changes layout immediately after, so I'm okay with that. The only thing we're missing now is this little chevron icon down here, but I'm not going to dwell on that. I think more valuable right now would be to make this menu actually do something. We've got all these social media links here, which is fine, but let's pretend that this blog or this journal, whatever it is, was part of a larger website. Well, there's no nav bar. We can't access the home page, the about page, the services page. We would want to click on these bars, these menu bars right here, this hamburger it's called, and expect a menu to open up. So let's go ahead and do this with some JavaScript. I'm going to use vanilla JavaScript, but you could do this actually easier with jQuery. If you were in week 5 or 6 and are not familiar with JavaScript, don't worry about this part. Don't let it derail you from practicing with Bootstrap, which is really the point of today. But if you want to code along, by all means do so. You'll need a main.js file inside a JS folder right next to your index.html and CSS folder. And we're going to animate a full screen menu. Okay. So first thing that I might want to happen, I want this menu, when I click on these bars, I want this menu to open to the full page. So to take up the full width of the page. So let's give my bars icon, my hamburger icon, I can use the class. I'm going to select it, bar menu button equals document.get element by class name fa-bus zero index, or if you're a little further along, I can do document.query selector followed by the CSS selector for fa-bus. That's going to select these bars. Menu button. Let's do this instead with an on-click. Keep it as simple as possible. So inside this list item, not the icon itself, but the list item, I'm going to write an on-click attribute, and we'll call a function called openMenu. Now we need to write our openMenu function. This is the function that will run when we click on this list item. And let's just test out that that on-click is working. So when I click, we get an alert. Perfect. It's working. We're good to go. Now what I want to do is change the style of this menu to be 8 VW wide to 100 VW wide. So document.query selector menu, which will select the menu dot style width equals 100 VW. See if that works. Oh, it does. It does work, but you'll notice that our menu is falling behind our image and indeed a lot of our text. That's because I wrote it way up here. It's the very first up here. It's the very first div inside our container fluid. And because it's HTML, things render in order. So all the contents of this row are on top of this menu. So what I want to do to fix that is give it a z index of, let's try something like 5. There we go. Now it's on top. Okay. So that works, and we have a full page menu, but now it won't close. I want to be able to click on these bars again and have it close. So I'm going to create a variable called open, and I'm going to set it equal to false, a Boolean value. And when we run the open menu function, which is to say when we click on these bars, it's going to change the value of open to the opposite of itself. So if it's false, open will be true. If it's true, open will be false. So in this way, we're going to be able to control for whether the menu is already open or closed or what have you. And this line of code right here, we're only going to execute if the menu is closed or not open. So if open equals false, which you could also write as this. So if open is false, we want to execute this line of code. If open is not false, that means the menu is already open. Then we're going to reset this. 100, 108, 108, and there you go. We have an animated menu, and we can add more stuff in here. Obviously, we can push these to the right when it's open, add some links to other more meaningful pages, but the important part is done. Got that. Now, what I want to make sure is, yeah, still works. Okay. A way you could refactor this pretty easily, if you pull up your inspector and look at the menu, it has this style attribute. Style equals width 8VW, and that's what's happening in our JavaScript. When this first line of code executes, the width of our menu, which we've written in our CSS, is overridden by that inline style. And then when we click it again, it switches to 8VW. Okay, that's all well and good, but what we could, instead of adding a new value here, simply leave it blank. So that when we click on these bars, no style attribute right now, but when we click on these bars, we get that style attribute with 100VW, and it overrides the CSS, and when we click on it again, that style attribute is empty, and we revert back to the original width in CSS. Okay. All right. So that's our menu. I'm not going to put too much time into making this menu more compelling, but you should by all means create a whole nother push all of these icons to one side, make an unordered list that says home, about, services, etc., etc., etc. But just like that, within the scope of about an hour and 20 minutes, we have a fully functioning, fully responsive, nice and clean, attractively styled Bootstrap web page. And the next step for all of you guys should be to actually take each of these articles and make them live links. So how would I do that? Inside my project folder, I would create a new file. Let's save it as bizdesign.html. And I'm going to go ahead and copy everything in index.html, paste it in bizdesign, but I'm going to remove the div with the background image, and I'm going to remove the load more entries section, and I'm going to remove all of this text. Everything but our title, which I'm going to change to visual design is no longer enough. The metadata we can change to match this down here. Okay, and before I go any further, I'm going to make this here a link. So visual design is no longer enough. I'm going to make this, yeah, I'll do the H2. The H2 is going to be wrapped in an anchor. And the href is going to be bizdesign.html. Let's quickly get rid of that style, though. Okay. Oh, typo. There we go. Okay, so now when I click on this, it should open up our internal blog page. It's coming along, but we don't need anything on the right, so I'm going to change this div in our row, which is now the only div in our row, to just be 12 columns. Oop, wrong document. Here it is. So if I get rid of that column large 6 class, there we go. We have a title. And we can even take this section and give it a class of text center. Nope, don't like that. Don't like that one bit. Back to where we were. Let's grab some dummy text. Fake article, and inside the section below, just put it all in a paragraph. Okay, remember how I said the browser will collapse all that white space? That's exactly what it did. If you want to overcome that, you can, in CSS, select your paragraphs and give them a property of white space with a value of pre, or preserve. That's not exactly what I was going for. There we go. So pre will preserve all of the white space, including all of this indentation on the left, which you don't want. Pre-wrap will preserve those line breaks and force the text to wrap the way that you expect. Okay, and there you go. We have a blog post or an article ready for, you know, an image or two or some styling. Maybe you want to take this middle paragraph, wrap it in a span. Use some Bootstrap classes, and not exactly what I had in mind, but you know, you can go to town. Actually, this would be better if we did it this way. Let's make this one its own paragraph element. Make sure to close the one above. I don't know, something like that. And there you go. You have fun stuff happening. And currently what we have is a fully styled, responsive, functioning setup blog homepage. You know, that's the original blog homepage, and an article ready for us to continue styling. So go ahead and take this and make it into a real project. Okay, make it into something your own. Finish out this menu. The animation and transition is already complete for you. The pages are already set up. The next step might be, how do you get back to the home page from this article? Not too hard. Figure it out. You probably want to make an article like this for every one of these links, including this big one up here. Dummy text is, of course, fine. You might want to change the titles, give them your own categories. You definitely want to pick your own picture. You might want to change out the icons here, get creative. But you have a nice template and a nice layout ready to go that'll work really well on all devices. And if you make it your own and host it as a project, then you've got a fairly sophisticated Bootstrap project to add to your portfolio. Okay, so that's that. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them my way. This has been recorded, so you will be able to see the video, turn on subtitles, pause if at any point we move too fast. If you just started Bootstrap and don't know any JavaScript, well, we didn't write all that much. You could take what's here and just run with it until you understand it. Or you could forego the animated menu. It's up to you. Do not just take this code and put it on your portfolios, though. I did see that a lot with the last time I did this, and that doesn't make me happy. Take this, show me that you understand it and learn from it, use it as a template. All the content is pretty easily laid out. There is not a lot of CSS at all. Almost no JavaScript. It's entirely using Bootstrap classes. If you're not sure what some of these classes are doing, you can always open your inspector, select an element, and find the class that you don't recognize in your Styles tab. And look, well, what's it doing? This is giving it a font size, font weight, and a line height. This is how it's changing this element. Or padding 5, on, off. Okay, so you need to get into the habit of doing these investigations on your own. It's something you need to become comfortable with. If you're not comfortable using your inspector, you're handicapping yourself. So practice it. I mean, just the act of seeking out these kinds of clues is a really essential skill that will help you out a lot. So try not to be overwhelmed by everything you see in the inspector. It's really just the Elements tab, which is your HTML, and the Styles tab, which is your CSS, but only the CSS that you need to see based on the element you've selected. And play with it. Okay. Anyway, take this, make it your own. Once the video is ready to post, I will add the finished code in a link in the description to that video. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.